Hello, this is a video I've sort of been looking forward to and dreading making. It's way off my usual beaten track. It's got nothing to do with cricket, it's got nothing to do with gaming. I feel like I'm in danger of becoming a political YouTuber, which I don't want to do. But it is just one of those little thought bubbles that I've had that I probably started to have 5 or 6 years ago. And to get that over with, it's the illusion of impartiality. And specifically, it started off with the BBC claiming it was impartial and it clearly not being impartial. But that was just my perspective. And I thought, but how come that perspective is shared by so many people from the left and the right? They claim the BBC is not partial, it favours the other side. And I realised that from my perspective, and little caveat here, little sidebar, this is just my perspective. I'm not claiming any of this is anything like political science or the fact. This is just my take on the situation. Please bear that in mind for everything I say from now on. This is just my view of the situation. So my issue with it really is that the illusion of impartiality is based on a false dualism of left and right. You have to forgive my mouse pointer clicking across. So traditionally, impartiality has been focused primarily on left and right. Traditionally, the left was a champion of the poor, the working class and the exploited. It was always a champion of the underdog, and quite rightly championed immigration, it championed the poor, it championed workers' rights, it championed women's rights. It's been at the forefront until quite recently of improving race relations, gender equality, LGBTQ issues. The left has always been the champion of those. The right was the champion of the traditional. In the UK they're called Conservatives, and with a capital C for the name of the party and a little c because they champion the business, law and order and security above all. And it's my understanding, and some people I know are going to disagree with this, you've got anarchists on both sides will disagree with this anyway, but it's my sort of general understanding that a reasonable average person, or maybe not reasonable, I shouldn't say that, but an average person would probably see a society would work best if it had all of these elements combined in some form or another. If there was we were prepared to learn from tradition, if business, law and order and security were backbones of a safe society, but all the things that the left has traditionally championed were continued to be championed, and that resource was always found to do that. And the battle traditionally, in terms of general elections throughout in the UK, which is where my knowledge is primarily based, has been around that. So combined over a period of government, certainly in my lifetime, I'm in my mid-50s now, they've tried to provide a balance. I grew up I was just about politically aware in the mid-70s. I was born in the late 60s. But I went through sort of Callaghan and Heath, and then through Thatcher and Major, and then Blair and Brown, and Cameron, and etc. So until the modern day. So I've had periods of my life that have been a very long period of time of Labour government, very long period of time of Conservative government, a decade or more at a time, whole stretches of my life under one government or the other. And we're now, 11 years into Conservative government, which followed 13 years of Labour government, which preceded, how many years? From 81 to 97, 16 years of Conservative government. So very long stretches, decades or more, a decade or more of each government type. And what I've noticed during that time is that the parties have changed dramatically. And this may be for various factors. It could just be because as a society we have more wealth and we can start to focus on things other than the basic necessities of a roof over most people's heads, something we're still failing as a society to do universally, but we seem to have moved on from that to other things. Food on everybody's plate, which again we haven't solved universally, but there seems to be a move to want to move away to that, to other things. And safety from violence, from corruption, be it in the workplace, be it from government institutions, the police, the court system, whatever. We've moved away from that into the realms of personality and interpersonality and things like that, and looking at different groups and how historically their rights and their ability to interact with the rest of society have been impacted by the laws that they've lived under and the societal norms which they've had to cope with. And that's all fine. But what that's done, what those actions have done, is they've redefined left and right. Left and right, for the last at least 10 years in the UK, possibly as many as 20, this tradition here, and I don't know whether my mouse is showing up, but this here doesn't show up. What we have now is two encampments which are not left and right. They are economic globalism on the one side and cultural protectionism on the other side. Economic globalism is to provide, now this is economic globalism, this is not globalism, this is not cultural globalism, this is a very specific offshoot of globalism, which actually doesn't bear, which is quite different from true globalism. So economic globalism, to provide services at the low end of the labour market, to increase the market size for scalable industries that are required for economic growth. The mantra for economic globalism is economic growth, GDP. It's the primary measure. So this probably happened post-war. From 1945-46 onwards, for the next 20 odd years, the primary measure of society's success was the happiness and employment status of their citizens. And then at some point, there was a Keynesian shift, those who know about Keynesian economics, where it was switched, where the control of the economy became the most important metric for societal success. In particular, initially the reduction of inflation, and then the continuous growth. Why is continuous growth important? Well, continuous growth, in the shorthand version of it, tomorrow's growth, 3%, 4%, 5% that a country might grow in terms of its economic value next year, diminishes historical debt. It makes it smaller, not in the number of pounds or dollars or euros, but in the amount that pound, dollar or euro amount is in ratio to the whole of society's worth. So for instance, I read somewhere that the First World War cost almost $2 billion to the US. And now, well, there are individual planes or individual squadrons of planes in the US which cost that much. And the reason it happened is inflation and GDP have just diminished over the 106, 107 years, 103 years, if I can count, since the First World War finished. Continued growth has just diminished that value. In 1918, when the war finished, a couple of $1 billion was an enormous sum of money. It was cripplingly large debt. 103 years on, it's virtually, it's not nothing. Of course it's not. I mean, none of us would turn it down. But in terms of global and national economic terms, it's absolutely trifling. And that's the result of economic growth. Now, so as you can see, GDP pays, as we grow, the debt of the past diminishes in its impact on today's society. But if we're always increasing debt, we always need to grow. And that is the mantra of, as far as I can see, of economic globalism. Cultural protectionism, which is perhaps traditionally more conservative, preserving your own cultural identity, providing job security for the indigenous population and stability of your core entities such as law, order and education, having that neither one of those provides for, neither economic globalism nor cultural protectionism necessarily provides for cultural globalism. Neither of those provide for it. I'll put up, I think here, if I get it up. Okay, so economic globalism. I'm going to pop this up here. I'm going to get it nice and small. I'm going to pop it up. So economic globalism refers to the widespread international movement of goods, capital, services, technology and information. It's the increasing economic integration and interdependence of national, regional and local economies across the world through an intensification of cross-border movement of goods, services, technologies and capital. Economic globalism primarily comprises the globalization of production, finance, markets, technology, organizational regimes, institutions, corporations and labour. Right, that is not, none of that describes cultural globalism, none of it. So it's not, that is not cultural globalism. Cultural globalism refers to, and it keeps expanding to full screen, refers to the sharing of ideas, meanings, hobbies and values around the world in such a way as to extend and intensify social relations. This process is marked by the common consumption of cultures that have been diffused by the internet, popular culture, media and international travel. This is added to the process of commodity exchange and colonisation, which have a longer history of carrying cultural meaning around the globe. The circulation of cultures enables individuals to partake in extended social relations that cross national and regional borders. The creation and expansion of such social relations is not merely observed on the material level. Cultural globalisation involves the formation of shared norms and knowledge with which people associate their individual and collective cultural identities. Okay, so here's their individual and collective cultural identity. So it's all about your cultural identity. It's all about people. Cultural globalization is about people meeting people, understanding their cultures, their histories, what is important to them, everything from their school systems, their legal systems, their religions, everything coming together on a personal level. Individual people understanding other individual people by means of travel and meeting and growing together. That is cultural globalization. From what I can see, it bears very little relation at all to economic globalism. There is a third one that's often mentioned, which is political globalism. Now, rather than get that up, what I will say is that political globalism is merely the tool in which economic globalism is enacted. Political globalism is the way in which economic globalism is put into law, that legislation is created to force economic globalism. Economic globalism requires very fast integration of cultures, very fast removal of anything which blocks those integration of cultures, and has very little time, money or resources to deal with people who are struggling with their cultural identity or struggling to assimilate, as the Borg might say. Okay, so the two, obviously they share the same globalism, but they are so wildly different. So economic globalism is not true globalism. Oops, it's a part of it. So if we go back to here, the left versus the right, economic globalism versus cultural protection, I'm just trying to take a reasonable middle of the road view here and say that, in my opinion, again, going back to what I said probably 10 minutes ago now, and hopefully I'll wrap this up in the next 5, neither is wholly correct. It's just my opinion. But it is the current political battlefield. The current political battlefield seems to me in the last 20 years not to be about left and right. And if organisations like the media still focus on left and right, and they can say, look, we support law and order and security and financial institutions, so we're on the right, but we also support an extended welfare state, freedom of movement, rapid cultural, not so much integration as forced integration. We support that, so we're the left. So look, we're left and right, but you're not, because all of those things combined are economic globalism. All of those things are, it borrows those, some from the left and some from the right, because economic globalism requires security. It requires that laws and orders are in place that allow for trade and capitalism to be extended to its fullest degree, that markets, particularly job markets, are filled from the bottom up to provide a cheap labour force, that the extended markets are absolutely fantastic for those who have a scalable business model. In other words, the cost of adding a new customer, every new customer is cheaper and provides a higher value than it did to the customer before. That's what a scalable business model is. So any business model that requires you to spend an hour a day doing something isn't scalable. Because after 24 hours, if you never go to sleep, you've run out of time and you're probably going to be exhausted, and you'll probably contract some horrible sleep deprivation related diseases and stuff within a couple of weeks. But when you're on Amazon, when you're a media company like Netflix, when you're a Google, you can keep adding people to your pool of clients, to your user base, and it just gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to scale up, because all it is more technology. You put simple automated rules in place, and if you need a job market, brilliant, because economic globalism will fill your job market from other parts of the world, whether you go over there and open call centers and pay pennies on the dollar or pennies on the pound that you would have to pay in the West, or you import the labour and fill from the bottom up so you can pay minimum wage or below for your labour market. Either way, that's economic globalism, and it borrows quite a few elements from the traditional right and quite a few elements from the traditional left. So there we are. Economic globalism requires security and legal structures of the right. It requires a welfare state and open border policies favoured by the left. Those who propose economic globalism can claim impartiality by denying these changes in the political landscape, because people aren't left and right anymore. That is not the argument. The argument is, are you economically globalist, or do you believe in national identity? I'm on the fence. I'm 55. I'm no more than 55, 45, one way or the other, and it changes from one month to the next depending on, not least of which I've got a family to support and things I like to do in my own life. So there's definitely a selfish element to the way I think about it. But I think if people were being honest, that's probably the way most of us actually think. So if there is a media institution that claims they're being impartial and bases their impartiality on their treatment of traditional values and left and right, they are denying the fact that that is no longer the political arena that anybody's fighting on anymore. It's irrelevant almost to people whether you're left or right. What is relevant is whether you're economically globalist or still believe in some sort of national identity. Neither of those leads to cultural globalism. In fact, you can get social globalism, which takes a long time because it involves people meeting people. As the description I just read out on Wiki said, it's mostly about interpersonal relationships, actually individual people understanding the nuances and mores of another culture, actually enjoying, understanding and compromising on another culture. I've got a whole story about how the West is so arrogant that we like to preserve cultures in amber at the day we found them. A culture, part of the reason, I'm just going to sidetrack again, cultures change whether we're looking at them or not, whether we found them or not. The absolute arrogance of some of people, especially in the West, especially those who probably from a well-meaning point say we shouldn't go and interfere with that culture. Cultures have always mixed. Cultures always have to change, and they have to change or else they die. A culture that doesn't change isn't a culture, it's a museum piece. It's dead. It's gone. And the main driver for cultural evolution and change is interaction with other cultures. If you're denying that, you're denying a simple human truth. However, that's not to say that you can't have an aggressive and improper interaction with another culture, an overly aggressive impact on another culture which disopportunes it and causes all sorts of problems. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is this idea that we discover a culture, which is arrogance itself. We discover it. It was always there. It didn't need to be discovered. We discovered it, and we should absolutely keep it just like it was the day we found it. And if it changes because of us looking at it, oh, woe is us, we've done something wrong. Don't be so damn arrogant. Cultural change is a universally accepted thing throughout mankind, even throughout most of the higher animal kind, apes and things. They evolve in interaction with other cultures as well. We all do. Anyway, I've gone off track here. So the BBC claims impartiality by referring to a game everybody else has stopped playing. Cultural impartiality in regards to traditional left and right as it was in post-war Europe and America is no longer relevant. It's no longer what people care about. And if you're basing your impartiality, BBC or Channel 4 or Fox News or CBS or CNN or wherever you are, if you're basing your impartiality on left and right, you're 20 years behind the times. And here's the thing, the really cynical thing I'm going to end on. I think they know that, because once I came to this conclusion, and probably you as you're busy listening to me waffle on, you've gone, well, that's obvious. That's just obvious. Once you look at it, once you pull back the curtain, that's obvious. People, when Conservatives won all those seats in the northeast of England, just over a year ago, and they did all the vox pops to people on the street. It was obvious why. It's obvious why Trump got in. It's obvious why Brexit happened. It's obvious this whole idea of the left supporting, the one group of society, the right supporting the institutions, is a game people stopped playing or stopped caring about anywhere near as much 25 years ago. And every year that left and right division becomes an even more smaller and distant part of history. It may come back, and I believe it probably should, because poor people, regardless of their race, regardless of their sex, regardless of their gender identity, regardless of their age, they need representation. And both political parties in the US and the UK, as far as I can see, are doing a terrible job of that. They've abandoned looking after the poor and the underprivileged to looking after intersectional groups who traditionally have represented large numbers and sections of the poor and underprivileged, but at the exclusion of other large sections who just don't fit the profiles they want to help anymore. And that's disgusting, and we all need to stop doing that. And there seems to be a huge number of people in the middle. I don't think what I'm saying here isn't going to resonate with loads of people. Maybe I'm being arrogant myself, but it is subjective. I'll stand up and admit completely that what I'm saying is entirely my own thoughts. It's a stream of consciousness. Clearly I didn't write much down before I started doing this, but it seems so mind-bogglingly obvious that we're playing the wrong game, and that most people can see it. It's like the parable, the story of the emperor's new clothes. You know, the emperor, if you don't know it, the emperor's tailors claim that they've made him the finest clothes out of the finest silk, and it's so fine that people can see straight through it. That it's so light that he can't even feel that he's wearing it. And he walks out into the crowd, to all intents and purposes, completely naked, because this very fine silk and this very light fabric is nothing. It doesn't exist. And it takes one small boy in the crowd to go, but he's naked, for everybody to realise the truth of the matter. And I don't think I'm that small boy. I think over the entire Western world and in other parts of the world, millions, possibly billions of people are realising that the game has changed, but our institutions insist on referring to us as if we're playing the old left-right game. We're not. And if they claim impartiality based on some game the rest of us have stopped playing, they need to stop doing it. Smell the coffee, pick the roses, I don't know what the metaphor might be. Anyway, it's a long winding rant. I apologise for that. Again, it could all be complete rubbish. I'm going to put a couple of links in the description below this. There is Economic Globalism and Political Universalism, Conflicting Issues, Part 2, which I'm going to put in there, which, well, it might as well be an indictment of the American Democrat Party. But it could also be an indictment of the UK Liberal Democrat Party. They seem to share a lot in common. In terms of this sort of thing, an indictment of the way, there's lots of other things, but it's all below if you want to have a look at it. Fetch Schrift for Emanuel Wallerstein, Part 2, Journal World Systems Research. But there's lots of others. Do your own research as well. Please don't take my word for any of this. Check out all your news media articles, see how they polarise, look on Wiki, go to university sites where studies have been done, reputable university sites where well-cited studies have been done on cultural integration, economic globalism, political globalism, social globalism. Do all your own research and see what conclusions you come to and where they differ from mine, because they will differ from mine. This is just my own personal opinion. And I promise, unless you're just abusive, I will not take the slightest offence at anything you disagree with in this video. Go ahead and disagree with whatever you like. That's fine. Teach me why I'm wrong. Show me why I'm wrong. Right. Well, that was nearly 25 minutes, more than twice as long as I hoped it would be. Thanks for sticking with me if you have. Cheers.